new study from UKZN has revealed that drinking establishments in Pietermaritzburg are simply not complying with safety regulations. Criminology lecturer Dr Nkosi Mbhele investigated compliance laws at alcohol establishments, specifically the Private Security Industry Regulation Act. Now, the study was conducted following a rapid rise in violent behaviour in the city. Let's discuss the findings of the study. Bring in Dr. Mbhele from UKZN, who joins us now via our video link. And Doc, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for making time. And what an interesting study this is. Perhaps let's begin here. What would you say was the central question that you are trying to answer in this research?
Good morning, and good morning to the viewers at home. The major question that this study wanted to find and answer is the compliance of private securities in drinking establishments. They are notoriously known as bouncers. When you talk of their regulation and compliance, that is the major concern that has been asked around, and a lot of players within the industry are unaware of the critical legislations that regulate and seek to enforce and ensure compliance within this space. A number of bouncers fail to meet the legal requirements of holding their positions in post as private securities, as is given in the SERA Act under its obligations of private securities.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who frequent these spaces probably don't even know that there's legislation that governs the kind of bouncer who ought to be essentially interacting with them. So help us paint the picture here, Dr. Mbhele. I mean, what does the law say about, for instance, the kind of training that these bouncers need for them to be there legally?
There are different levels of bouncers or private securities, but bouncers mostly fall under crowd control or events. So for them to be legally identified as private securities, they need to obtain grade level E, which will provide them with the proper skills and resources to hold their positions. And all drinking establishments should not hire bouncers themselves. They should outsource the services to registered private security companies that are recognized to be legitimate by SERA as the regulator of private securities. So when they outsource these services from private security companies, they need to do proper checking and vetting of all the private security officers that are under those private security companies to see if they hold appropriate and the required level of training and certificates to provide the kind of services that are most appropriate for drinking establishments.
Yeah. The difficulty, of course, is that if we don't get this right, you may very well see the kind of incidents that we've witnessed, not only in Pietermaritzburg, but around the country in these, drinking establishments. I mean, if you think of Enyobeni Tavern in the Eastern Cape, the mass shooting that took place in Soweto, and I imagine many other similar incidents in Pietermaritzburg, does your study create that connection that if the bouncers aren't necessarily complying with the law, it does create a breeding ground for the kind of violence we've seen mostly at taverns and other drinking establishments?
Yes, it does. It's common sense that if you are not trained and skilled to perform a certain duty that we are holding, you won't be able to deal with the certain challenges or complications that we might face. So being able to employ skilled and qualified private securities will help solve a lot of problems of violence in these drinking establishments. So if you look at some of the drinking establishments that actually did do the correct employment of private securities and held proper private security companies and proper private security officers, you found that there's less violence in those drinking establishments as compared to drinking establishments with private security officers or private security companies that are legitimate or registered with SERA and hold private securities that are not skilled or hold certain and appropriate requirements requirements.
Where does your study leave the patrons? Because in at least my line of work, we spend a considerable amount of time speaking about just how much alcohol South Africans typically consume and how their behavior leads to the violence. Your study, of course, is adding quite a complex nuance to this interpretation. Did you spend any time considering, I don't know, the kind of culpability patrons have on the violence we see?
Yes, definitely. So patrons do play a major role in exhibiting violence and aggression in drinking establishments, especially if they are intoxicated. So obviously there are some studies that have associated high level of intoxication with violence and aggression. And it becomes problematic for bouncers or private securities to control and manage those kind of patrons. So patrons also do play or have some role to play in violence and aggression in drinking establishments. Hence, it is important that private securities are skilled and trained well enough to be able to manage this kind of patrons who pose to be a problem when they are highly intoxicated.
Yeah.
And drinking establishments should not allow highly intoxicated patrons to be in drinking establishment because they may lead to all sorts of problems.
Indeed, but I can almost hear some of the owners of these establishments saying, absolutely no way. Those are our best customers, at least before they turn violent.
Yeah. To them, profit is important. So they don't really pay much attention to safety. They only focus on making as much profit as possible. So that is why we have major issues and problems when it comes to security in drinking establishments.
Yeah. If somebody were to, let's say, get hurt at a drinking establishment because of the violence there, and it later emerges that that particular establishment did not, in fact, comply with CERA, this piece of regulation that actually governs, the kind of security personnel you should have, the Private Security Industry Regulation Authority. Are patrons able to essentially take them to court? I mean, do you reckon there could be a possibility for legal recourse in that matter for this particular establishment failing, quite frankly, to adhere to the law?
Yes, definitely. Not being able to follow the legal routes of, performing your role leads to criminal activities being charged against you. So if any sort of violence happens because of maybe the bouncers were violent towards a patron, then the patron may take the drinking establishment and also the bouncer to court. And it is illegal, first of all, to have those bouncers who are not legally, obligated to be there to perform and be in those drinking establishments. So, if you have bouncers who are not legally registered and are not recognized as private securities, you are engaging in criminal activity and you may be faced with being charged with criminal activities.
And to be fair, it's difficult to believe any of these establishments owners claiming ignorance. This, at least insofar as you're concerned, is something that they should know, and so if they're not doing, they're probably willfully ignoring.
Yeah, because when you apply for a liquor license, it comes with all of these conditions. You are not given the liquor license if you do not meet all of these conditions. So if you are going to host patrons and you are going to hold events of a certain number of individuals, you are obligated to have private securities, and it is stipulated in your liquor license. So not doing that is deviating from the law and you're engaging in criminal activity. So it is a problem.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating study as we try to better understand our society. And let's face it, these drinking establishments form part of the society. Dr. Nkosi Mbhele, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Mbhele is a researcher with UKZN.